Willowbrook was a picturesque town nestled in the rolling hills of Vermont. With its charming cobblestone streets, colonial-style houses, and a tight-knit community, it was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. The town was centered around St. Mark's Church, a centuries-old stone building with a towering steeple that could be seen from miles away. The church was not just a place of worship, but also the heart of the community, hosting events, festivals, and gatherings throughout the year. At the center of this community was Father Michael Thompson, a 45-year-old priest who had served at St. Mark's for over a decade. With his silver-streaked dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and a gentle demeanor, he was beloved by the townspeople. Father Michael was known for his compassionate sermons and his dedication to helping those in need. He ran the local food bank, organized charity events, and was always there to lend a listening ear. Among his parishioners was Emily Harris, a 33-year-old woman married to David Harris, a successful businessman who owned a chain of hardware stores in the region. Emily was a striking woman with auburn hair, green eyes, and a warm smile. She was active in the church's community outreach programs and often volunteered her time to help Father Michael with various initiatives. Emily and David had been married for 8 years, but their relationship had become strained. David was frequently away on business trips, leaving Emily feeling isolated and neglected. She found solace in her work at the church and in her conversations with Father Michael. One rainy afternoon, as the soft drizzle tapped against the stained glass windows of St. Mark's, Emily stayed behind after a committee meeting to help Father Michael organize supplies for an upcoming charity drive. "Thank you for your help, Emily," Father Michael said, stacking canned goods on a shelf. "It's my pleasure," Emily replied, smiling. "I enjoy being able to contribute." As they worked side by side, their conversation flowed effortlessly. They discussed literature, philosophy, and their shared concern for the less fortunate in Willowbrook. "You have a kind heart," Father Michael observed, glancing at her. "The community is lucky to have you." Emily blushed slightly. "I could say the same about you. You've done so much for this town." Over the weeks, their interactions became more frequent. Emily found herself confiding in Father Michael about her marital troubles. "David seems so distant lately," she admitted one day, her voice tinged with sadness. "It's like we're living separate lives." Father Michael listened attentively. "Marriage can be challenging," he offered gently. "Have you spoken to him about how you feel?" "I've tried, but he dismisses it," she sighed. "He says he's busy providing for us." Father Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I'm here if you ever need someone to talk to." As time went on, their relationship deepened. The line between priest and parishioner blurred, and they found themselves drawn to each other in ways they hadn't anticipated. One evening, after a late-night choir practice, Father Michael and Emily sat alone in the dimly lit church. "The moonlight looks beautiful through the glass," Emily remarked, gazing up. "It does," Father Michael agreed, but his eyes were fixed on her. She turned to meet his gaze, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. The air was thick with tension. "I should go," Emily whispered, standing up abruptly. "Emily, wait," he said, reaching out to gently grasp her hand. She hesitated, her heart pounding. "This isn't right," she murmured. "I know," he admitted, his voice barely audible, "but I can't deny how I feel." Neither could she. Without another word, they closed the distance between them and began to kiss and hold each other more tightly, and their forbidden affair began. They met in secret, careful to avoid arousing suspicion. Their rendezvous took place in secluded areas, an abandoned chapel on the outskirts of town, a hidden clearing in the woods, and occasionally in the privacy of the rectory late at night. Unbeknownst to them, their discreet meetings had not gone entirely unnoticed. Margaret Whitman, an elderly parishioner known for her keen observation and penchant for gossip, had spotted them together on more than one occasion. One afternoon, while having tea with her friend Helen Brooks, Margaret leaned in conspiratorially. "Have you noticed how much time Father Michael spends with Emily Harris?" she inquired, stirring her tea. "I have," Helen replied cautiously. "But I'm sure it's just church business." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps, but I've seen them together at odd hours. It's rather peculiar." Word began to spread subtly through the town's grapevine, though no one dared to confront either Father Michael or Emily directly. Meanwhile, David Harris remained largely oblivious. His business was expanding, requiring more of his attention. He was often in neighboring cities, negotiating deals and overseeing new store openings and expanding the business. One weekend, David returned home unexpectedly early from a trip. Entering the house, he found it empty. Puzzled, he called out Emily. "Are you home?" Receiving no response, he decided to wait. As he settled into his study, he noticed an unfamiliar book on the coffee table, a collection of poetry by Rilke. Inside the cover was a handwritten note, "For moments of reflection." M. Frowning, David wondered who M could be. Later that evening, Emily returned, startled to find David home. "David, I didn't expect you until Monday," she exclaimed, forcing a smile. "I wrapped things up early," he said, studying her expression. "Where were you?" "I was at the church, helping with preparations for the fundraiser," she replied smoothly. "You're spending a lot of time there," he observed, his tone neutral. "It's important work," she defended gently, "and it keeps me busy while you're away." He nodded, but couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was amiss. Over the next few days, David began to pay closer attention. He noticed Emily receiving text messages late at night, her phone buzzing discreetly. When he approached, she would quickly tuck it away. One evening, as Emily showered, David picked up her phone, which she had left on the nightstand. Hesitating briefly, he unlocked it. She had not changed the passcode they shared. Scrolling through her messages, he found a string of conversations with a contact saved as M. The messages were cryptic, but intimate. "Looking forward to seeing you tonight. Last night was wonderful." His heart pounded as realization dawned. Mish, could it be Father Michael? Determined to uncover the truth, David decided to follow Emily the next day. He feigned a business meeting in the city, kissing her goodbye in the morning. "See you tomorrow," he said, forcing a smile. "Travel safe," she replied, unaware of his suspicions. Instead of leaving town, David parked discreetly near their house and waited. Around noon, he saw Emily leave, dressed elegantly rather than casually. She drove towards the outskirts of town, and he followed at a safe distance. She turned onto a narrow, secluded road leading to the abandoned chapel, a place he hadn't thought of since their youth. Parking his car behind a thicket, David approached the chapel on foot. Through a cracked window, he saw Emily and Father Michael in an embrace. Anger and betrayal surged through him. Clenching his fists, he fought the urge to burst in. Instead, he retreated to his car, his mind racing with thoughts of revenge. That evening, David confronted Emily. "How was your day?" he asked casually over dinner. "It was fine," she replied, avoiding eye contact. "Busy with church activities." "Is that so?" he said, his voice betraying a hint of sarcasm. She looked up, sensing a shift in his demeanor. "Yes, why do you ask?" "Because I know you're lying," he snapped, his eyes piercing into hers. "David, what are you talking about?" "Don't play innocent," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "I saw you with Father Michael." Emily's face paled. It's not what you think," she stammered. "I don't insult my intelligence," he retorted. "How long has this been going on?" She was silent, tears welling in her eyes. "Answer me," he demanded. "Several months," she confessed quietly. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "You're unbelievable," he seethed. "A priest. Do you have any idea what this could do to both of us?" "David, please," she pleaded. "Let me explain." "I don't want to hear it," he declared, storming out of the room. Over the next few days, tension hung heavy in the household. David was cold and distant, while Emily was consumed by guilt and fear. Unbeknownst to Emily, David was plotting his next move. He began digging into Father Michael's past, looking for any dirt that could be used against him. He hired a private investigator, Thomas Green, to gather information. "Find out everything you can about Father Michael Thompson," David instructed. "I want to know if he has any skeletons in his closet." "Consider it done," Thomas replied confidently. As Thomas delved into Father Michael's history, he uncovered a troubling detail. Years ago, in a different parish, there had been whispers of inappropriate conduct, though nothing had been proven. Armed with this information, David approached the bishop overseeing St. Mark's Church, Bishop Alan Reynolds. "Bishop Reynolds, I have something urgent to discuss," David stated during a scheduled meeting. "Of course, my son," the bishop replied, gesturing for him to sit. David presented the evidence he had collected, including photographs taken by Thomas Green of Emily and Father Michael together. "This is a grave accusation," Bishop Reynolds said solemnly, examining the photographs. "I thought it my duty to bring this to your attention," David said, feigning concern for the church. "I appreciate your discretion," the bishop acknowledged. "I will handle this matter internally." However, David was not satisfied with internal action. He wanted retribution. That Sunday, as the congregation gathered for Mass, a palpable tension filled the air. Rumors had begun to circulate, and eyes followed Father Michael as he approached the pulpit. Before he could begin the sermon, Bishop Reynolds stepped forward. "Dear parishioners," the bishop began, his voice heavy, "it is with a heavy heart that I must inform you that Father Michael will be taking an indefinite leave of absence." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Is everything all right?" someone called out. "This is a private matter," the bishop replied. "We ask for your prayers during this time." Father Michael stood silently, his face stoic, but his eyes reflecting turmoil. Emily sat in the pews, her heart sinking. She knew that their secret had been exposed, but she didn't know how far it would go. As the congregation filed out of the church, whispers filled the air. Speculation ran rampant about why Father Michael was suddenly stepping down. Some believed it was due to health reasons. Others suspected a scandal. Emily hurried out, avoiding eye contact, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. That evening, Emily went to the rectory to find Father Michael. She found him packing his belongings, his usually composed demeanor shattered. "Michael, what's happening?" she asked urgently. He looked up, anguish etched on his face. "The bishop has relieved me of my duties. Someone has exposed our relationship." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "What are we going to do?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but we can't stay here. The town will turn against us. Maybe we can leave together," she suggested, desperation creeping into her voice. He hesitated. "Emily, I took vows. I've already broken them, but leaving priesthood entirely, I need time to think." Feeling rejected and alone, Emily left the rectory, the weight of their situation pressing down on her. Meanwhile, David was not satisfied with merely ruining Father Michael's career. Consumed by rage, he devised a more sinister plan. He arranged another meeting with Thomas Green. "I need you to take care of a problem," David said, his tone cold and businesslike. Thomas eyed him warily. "What exactly do you mean?" "I want Father Michael eliminated," David stated bluntly. Thomas shook his head. "I'm a private investigator, not a hitman. I'll pay you handsomely," David pressed, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "Consider it a bonus." Thomas glanced at the envelope but pushed it back. "I can't help you with this. You're crossing the line." Frustrated, David realized he would have to take matters into his own hands. Over the next few days, David began stalking Father Michael, learning his routines. One late evening, he followed him to the abandoned chapel where he and Emily often met. Father Michael entered the chapel seeking solace in the quiet sanctuary. As he knelt in silent prayer, the door creaked open behind him. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. David stepped forward, his face shadowed. "We need to talk." "David," Father Michael said, standing up slowly. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be." "Angry doesn't begin to cover it," David replied, his eyes flashing with fury. "You betrayed my trust, violated your vows, and destroyed my marriage." "I'm sorry," Father Michael said sincerely. "I never meant to cause you pain." "It's too late for apologies," David spat. "You took everything from me." Reaching into his coat, David pulled out a revolver. Father Michael's eyes widened. "David, please, this isn't the way." "Give me one good reason why I shouldn't end this right now," David demanded, the gun trembling slightly in his hand. "Violence won't solve anything," Father Michael pleaded. "Think about the consequences." David hesitated, internal conflict evident on his face. Just then, a noise outside startled them both, a branch snapping underfoot. "Who's there?" David shouted, turning toward the door. Emily emerged from the shadows, having followed Father Michael in hopes of speaking with him. "David, stop," she cried, her voice echoing. "Don't do this." "Emily." David's gaze shifted between her and Father Michael. "You followed him here." "I had to talk to him," she said, stepping forward cautiously. "Please, put the gun down." "This is perfect," David sneered. "Both of you here together." "David, I know you're hurt," Emily said softly. "But this isn't you." "And you don't know anything about me," he retorted. "You threw our life away." "I made mistakes," she admitted, "but we can find a way to move forward." "There's no going back," he declared. In the 10th standoff, Father Michael saw an opportunity. "David, if you need someone to blame, blame me," he said. "Let Emily go." "How noble," David mocked. "But you're both responsible." As emotions escalated, David's grip on the gun tightened. Emily, desperate to defuse the situation, took another step forward. "Please," she whispered, "for all the years we've shared, don't do this." Suddenly, a loud bang shattered the silence the gun had fired. For a moment, everything was still. Then Father Michael crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder where blood began to seep through his fingers. "Father Michael," Emily screamed, rushing to his side. David stared at the scene, shock overtaking his features. "I didn't mean to," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Realizing the gravity of his actions, David turned and fled the chapel, disappearing into the night. Emily tore a piece of her clothing to press against Father Michael's wound. "Hold on," she urged. "I'm calling for help." She dialed 911, her hands shaking. "Please, we need an ambulance at the old chapel on Willow Road. There's been a shooting." "Help is on the way," the operator assured her. Within minutes, sirens pierced the quiet night as emergency services arrived. Paramedics tended to Father Michael, stabilizing him before transporting him to the hospital. Detective Ethan Parker, a seasoned investigator with the Vermont State Police, arrived on the scene. Tall with a stern demeanor, his sharp eyes missed nothing. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked Emily gently. She recounted the events, her voice quavering. David was angry. He had a gun. It went off during the confrontation. "Do you know where he might have gone?" Detective Parker inquired. "I don't," she admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I'm afraid of what he might do." "We'll find him," the detective assured her. and a PB was issued for David Harris. Patrol units scoured the town and surrounding areas, but he remained elusive. At the hospital, Father Michael underwent surgery. The bullet had passed through his shoulder, narrowly missing vital organs. Detective Parker visited him once he was stable. "Father Thompson, I'm Detective Parker. I need to ask you some questions about the incident." Father Michael nodded weakly. "I'll help however I can. Can you describe what happened at the chapel?" "David confronted me," he explained. "He was angry about my relationship with Emily. Things escalated, and he had a gun. It went off during our argument." "Did he threaten you directly?" "He was distraught," Father Michael said. "I believe he didn't intend to shoot me. Intentional or not, he discharged a firearm and caused serious injury," the detective noted. "So we need to locate him." "I hope he can get the help he needs," Father Michael said softly. Meanwhile, David had gone into hiding. Consumed by guilt and fear, he drove aimlessly until he reached a remote cabin he owned near Lake Serene, a place few knew about. Back in Willowbrook, rumors spread rapidly. The town was abuzz with talk of the scandal and the shooting. Some expressed sympathy for David, while others were pulled by his actions. Emily, under police protection, stayed at a hotel. She was racked with guilt and worry. Detective Parker met with her again. "Do you have any idea where David might go?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "There's a cabin by Lake Serene. It's isolated. He might be there." "Thank you," the detective said, noting the location. "We'll dispatch units to check it out." The tactical team was assembled, and they approached the cabin cautiously. As they surrounded the area, Detective Parker called out through a megaphone, "David Harris, this is the Vermont State Police. Come out with your hands up." Inside the cabin, David sat at a table, the revolver lying in front of him. Hearing the police, he knew there was no escape. "David, we just want to talk," Detective Parker continued. "No one else needs to get hurt." After a tense few moments, the door opened slowly. David stepped out, his hands raised. "I surrender," he said quietly. Officers moved in, handcuffing him without incident. At the station, David was booked on charges of attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon. During interrogation, Detective Parker sat across from him. "Do you want to tell me your side of the story?" David stared at the table. "I didn't mean to shoot him," he said hollowly. "I just wanted to confront him." "To bringing a gun to a confrontation suggests otherwise," the detective pointed out. "But I wasn't thinking clearly," David admitted. "Everything spiraled out of control. Why didn't you come forward after the incident?" "I panicked," he confessed. "I didn't know what to do." "Running only made things worse," Detective Parker noted. David sighed heavily. "I know." As the legal process unfolded, the case drew significant media attention. The scandal involving a priest, an affair, and a shooting was sensational fodder for news outlets. At the preliminary hearing, David's attorney argued that the shooting was accidental, resulting from emotional distress. The prosecution countered that David had premeditated the confrontation by arming himself, demonstrating intent to harm. Meanwhile, Father Michael recovered slowly from his injury. Conflicted by his role in the events, he requested to speak with David. But with permission from authorities, they met in a supervised setting. "David," Father Michael began, his voice gentle. David looked up, remorse etched on his face. "I'm sorry," he said, tears welling in his eyes. "I didn't want any of this to happen." "I forgive you," Father Michael said sincerely. "We all made mistakes. How can you forgive me after what I did?" David asked, disbelief evident. "Forgiveness is a cornerstone of my faith," he replied. "Holding on to anger won't heal anyone." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared experiences hanging between them. "What's going to happen now?" David asked quietly. "That's up to the courts," Father Michael acknowledged. "But perhaps this can be a turning point for all of us." As the trial approached, Emily struggled with her own guilt. She decided to testify, hoping to bring clarity to the situation. In court, the atmosphere was tense. The prosecution painted David as a jealous husband who, unable to control his anger, resorted to violence. David's defense team argued that he was a man pushed to the brink by betrayal, acting in a moment of emotional turmoil. Emily took the stand, her hands trembling slightly. "Mrs. Harris, can you describe your relationship with Father Michael?" So the prosecutor asked. "We developed a close friendship that became more," she admitted. "I take full responsibility for my actions." "Did you inform your husband about the affair?" "He discovered it on his own," she replied. "How did he react?" "He was angry and hurt," she said softly. "I tried to speak with him, but he wouldn't listen." "Did you ever feel threatened by your husband?" "Not until the night of the shooting," she acknowledged. During cross-examination, David's attorney questioned her. "Mrs. Harris, did you consider how your affair might impact your husband?" "I was selfish," she admitted. "I wasn't thinking clearly." "Is it fair to say that your actions contributed to his emotional state?" "Yes," she whispered. Father Michael also testified, reiterating that he believed David did not intend to shoot him. "I think the gun discharged accidentally," he stated. David was overwhelmed. The jury deliberated for several days. Ultimately, they found David Harris guilty of attempted voluntary manslaughter and assault with a deadly weapon. At sentencing, the judge addressed the courtroom. "This case is a tragic example of how personal failings and unchecked emotions can lead to devastating consequences. While Mr. Harris's actions cannot be excused, the court recognizes the complex circumstances surrounding this incident." Turning to David, the judge continued, "Mr. Harris, you are hereby sentenced to 10 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 7 years." David nodded solemnly, accepting the judgment. In the aftermath, the community of Willowbrook grappled with the fallout. Trust in the church was shaken and parishioners were divided in their opinions. Father Michael resigned from his position permanently, choosing to leave the priesthood. He sought redemption by dedicating himself to humanitarian work overseas, hoping to make amends for his transgressions. Emily faced ostracization from many in the town. She decided to move away, seeking a fresh start where she could rebuild her life. The weight of her choices remained with her, but she was determined to find a path toward healing. Detective Ethan Parker reflected on the case, reminded of the profound impact that personal decisions can have on a community. He continued his work with renewed dedication, aiming to serve justice while understanding the human complexities behind each case. Willowbrook slowly began to heal. The scandal became part of the town's history, a cautionary tale about the dangers of secrecy and the importance of communication. Years later, a new priest arrived at St. Mark's Church. The congregation welcomed him cautiously, but over time trust was rebuilt. David Harris served his sentence quietly. Upon release, he chose to live a humble life, dedicating himself to helping others affected by emotional trauma and violence. Emily found solace in art, channeling her experiences into paintings that spoke of loss, forgiveness, and resilience. Her work gained recognition, allowing her to connect with others who had faced similar struggles. Father Michael's humanitarian efforts brought aid to impoverished communities. Though he carried the burden of his past, he found purpose in making a positive difference. The lives of those involved were forever altered, but from the tragedy emerged lessons of accountability, forgiveness, and the enduring capacity for change.